Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second in the series of webinars. Science expert for this competition. This webinar is titled Putting It All Together, Going to Market. So Sam, I'll let you take it from here.
Right, thanks a lot, Nicola. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to day 2 of 3 just before I get started, can everybody hear me clearly and can everybody see my screen? Maybe you could just say yes in the chat box. I just want to get a sense that everybody can hear me clearly and my screen is clear. Perfect. Thanks a lot, Cuthbert. Thanks a lot, Shilton. Great, great. Okay, let's fire away and let's get started. Let's do a quick recap. And while we do the recap, I'll also do a quick introduction on myself. For those of you that missed day 1 of 3, my name's Otim Samuel. I am Ugandan, and I have done a substantial amount of work with Finmark Trust. I currently run my own company, and I thought from the interactions I've had with various members, various innovators, I thought I'd put together a couple of slides that would provide some information, especially on how to position your innovation, not just to the judges, but to the world. So that's the reason I'm doing these mini webinars, as I like to call them. I'm also aware that there are some of us who are attending another pitch event today. I think I saw that on some of the Skype forums. And I'm really sorry about the clash in the dates, but at least I know there will be recordings done, so we will be able to, those who miss this will be able to get. So let's get back to the recap of day 1. Just for those of you who might have missed bits of it, let's do a quick recap and then we can jump right into the session. Day 1, we did approximately 2 slides and I kept you online for about 1.5 hours. Today, my intention is to make it very brief. That is approximately 40 minutes, and that should allow us a lot more opportunity for questions, and I can provide as much feedback as possible. If we're not able to take your questions at the end, feel free to send them to me on Slack. I'll do my best to respond as quickly as possible. So on day 1, one of the first things we talked about was having the right perspective or adopting the right perspective. And one of the key takeaways was we see what we believe, not the other way around. Most people claim they believe what they see, but the truth is we actually see what we believe. Case in point, I never had the privilege of meeting the late Nelson Mandela or Mother Teresa, but from everything I've heard, these were icons of integrity. If I ever had the privilege of meeting them, even if they used a swear word, in my mind, I would find a way to justify it because I believe that they are icons of integrity and consequently they have a good reason for using a swear word. Not that they ever used a swear word, but that just tells you that I see them in a light or through a lens that I have come to believe. And consequently, that's the way we also need to approach our innovations. The way we see the world needs to influence the way we come up with our innovations. Second thing we talked about was fear, especially the fear of failure. And one of the key takeaways from that one was a quote by Mark Twain: do the thing you fear the most, and the death of fear is certain. I gave a couple of examples. I'll probably refine them today. If you're afraid of riding a bicycle, one of the best ways to get over that fear is to practice riding a bicycle more often. Do the thing you fear the most, and the death of fear is certain to happen. If you're afraid of swimming, same story. Then we also talked about the strategies. And strategies kind of encompass so many things, but we mainly focused on how we can strategize our development or our deployment of our innovations so that we have the maximum bang for the money or the maximum return for the least effort. One of the things I highlighted extensively was focus on what you listen to, because whatever you listen to influences the way you think. And if you sow a thought, you reap an act. You sow an act, you reap a habit. You sow a habit, you reap a character, and you sow a character, you reap a destiny, or rather, a future. And that's a quote attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson. I also pointed out an approach, a very valuable strategy for many of us who are into the technology space, which is the goal lean approach, something that has been fronted extensively by Eric Weers in his book, The Lean Startup. Outside of the strategy, we talked also about the audience, understanding your audience. Right now, many of us are preparing to do a pitch, or many of us have had the privilege of doing a pitch. In the case of a pitch, your audience is the judges. But in the case of the world, or in the case of hitting the market, your audience is the entire world. And then you have to narrow down on who are you focusing on. If you're building an app, let's say an online ticketing system, you have to target presumably the travelers. If you're building some kind of insurance platform, you're targeting people within a certain age bracket, particularly families, especially where they have children who require insurance. And this is just to understand your audience. The question becomes, what's your audience searching for? How do you get into the mind of your audience? How do you make sure that your product is properly positioned for the audience? We also touched on keeping it simple, courtesy of me having looked at several interfaces that many of you are working on, the innovations, their interfaces. And I noticed some of you are fitting a little too much information, and that's a bit of a mistake. I've done that before. It's dangerous to put too much information because the human mind tends to space out when you give it a little too much to take in. So keep it simple. And then we crown it all by talking about the tools of the trade. Now, how do we bring all this together? How do we make it succeed? Some people would question, should we start with focusing on the perspective, or should we start by understanding the audience? And as I thought about this, it hit me that perhaps I could share an experience that got me to see how all these play together. And that experience I had really talked about previously, which is one of my, I would call it a rolling train wreck. This was a professional networking system that I had the privilege of building several years ago, long before I was sufficiently tutored in how best to deploy an idea, or how best to bring an idea to life and hand it to the market. Suffice to say, this product never saw the light of day. And just to explain a bit about the relationship I had with the client who was behind this, the client would typically provide information. This is by way of documents, phone calls, and so many other things. And I, being the developer, would convert the information the client provided into the relevant application interfaces. This would either be the multiple user types, advert management, or probably group forums and that kind of implementation. Now, some of you are working in teams, which means you might be the brains behind the innovation. You might be the one who conceived the idea for an online ticketing system, but you may not be the developer. What that means is you're likely in the same situation I was in, whereby you're providing instruction to another developer who then has to implement those instructions. And the reason I'm painting that picture is because it helps you connect what you might be doing right now with what we did in the past and see exactly how we derailed and ultimately hit cataclysmic failure. On the other hand, you might be the business owner and the developer at the same time. In that case, your dilemmas will be a little different, but needless to say, the things I'm going to talk about might actually help you get a good sense for how you can improve your chances of success. There are 6 points that I would like to take us through on what actually led to our failure. It's rather embarrassing to talk about it, but let's get started. Number 1, if you find yourself focusing extensively on the tech, you might be in for an unpleasant surprise. Let me explain what I mean by focusing extensively on the tech. In my case, the client started by providing the database tables, which one might ask, what's wrong with that? The problem is when you provide database tables, it doesn't tell the developer what the system should look like. Always keep in mind that a developer is a human being. So if you're coming up with an innovation and you want something to be produced, you want a website, you want a mobile app to be produced, a developer understands interfaces. If you provide database tables, careful. You might be on an ego trip just trying to tell the developer, I understand the world in which you operate. And consequently, I can speak your language. What you ought to be doing instead is, if you want the developer to implement certain specifics about the database, just explain to them that, for instance, I want to be able to capture multiple phone numbers. Why? Because today, the average person has 2 phone numbers or even 3 or 4. That tells a developer I need to come up with a structure that recognizes what we'd call referential integrity. There's going to be a secondary key and you can hold any number of second, third, fourth, fifth phone numbers in a secondary table, which is going to be linked to the table that holds the biodata. And that's all the developer needs to do. Any developer worth their salt is definitely going to be able to implement that. That basically points out where we went wrong almost at the very beginning. Just a failure to properly articulate, and we ended up focusing on the wrong thing as opposed to focusing on the right things. Number two, if you ever find yourself dwelling extensively on legalities at the expense of trust, be careful. Fear might be your master. Why do I say that? It's because in our situation, we spent so much time reviewing what the contract stated, what each party was responsible for bringing to the table. And that, for lack of a better word, wastes a lot of time. However, one might ask, should we not focus on the legalities? Yes, by all means, pay attention to them, but not at the expense of trust. And when I talk about one of the projects where I hit a lot more success, I'll focus on how we built trust and later on fell back to the legalities. Now, many people might say that is dangerous, but hey, if you want to get a different result, you have to do something different, right? Thirdly, if you ever find yourself obsessed over the drafting of things like the rules, terms of references, instead of drawing interfaces, you're also likely going to end up in the same situation we ended up, which is a non-existent product. We found ourselves, just to put this into perspective, when we were doing the user acceptance tests, we came up with very extensive documents that captured approximately 80 use case scenarios, and I think approximately 250 users that would be doing the tests. This got very interesting, reason being, we never ended up engaging any of these users to actually do the tests. These documents were once again another ego trip, which was just fundamentally an academic approach to make sure we had a very rock solid user acceptance test document in anticipation of a future audit. And in the process, instead of focusing on coming up with what you'd call the interfaces that make things resoundingly clear, especially to the users who are going to be doing the testing, we sacrifice that for what you'd call accurate documentation. Be careful if you're doing the same, because chances are you're going to walk down the same path we did. We also suffer the situation of poor communication, and especially if you're in this situation where you are the client and you have somebody else doing the development, if you're working particularly in teams, it pays to have open communication channels whereby you can provide a specification and the developer can turn around and say, that's not clear. What exactly are you asking for? Now, let me give you a classic example. The client at one point provided specifications which were a label for a checkbox. And the label for the checkbox read, advertising contract can roll over. Now, I didn't understand what rollover meant. So I turned to the client and I said, what does rollover mean? And his response was, that's typical advertising lingo. Now that left me thinking, what the advertising lingo? I am not an advertising expert, so I can't translate that. My end result was I implemented and had a database flag whereby it was either yes or no for advertising contract rolls over, but there was actually no functionality implemented in accordance with that. Notice how a failure to communicate effectively or even keep open communication channels within your team can result in cataclysmic failure of your initiative, all because you're trying to use big words. And my advice is always keep it simple. If you find yourself obsessing over engaging the relevant experts, for instance, penetration testers, before you engage with the actual users of the system, you might also be in for an unpleasant surprise. There's nothing wrong with engaging penetration testers, mind you. But if you obsess over that, trying to have what you call a bulletproof system, that might cost you unpleasant amounts of time at the expense of traction. There is a company I've heard of that is obsessed with, let us get it done than having it perfect. Done is better than perfect. And I really like that mantra because it sacrifices sometimes bulletproofness of a system just to get the feedback from the actual users of the system. And I'll tell you a little more about that when I showcase one of the products that was a success. This also points to failure to focus on the correct audience. If you don't understand who your audience is and what your audience wants, you might begin thinking that your audience is the experts. But industry experts are not probably your first audience. Your first audience typically might be the early adopters. And mind you, early adopters don't care much for dangers in the system. Who are early adopters? These are people who line up for the latest iPhone and they pitch camp at 5 a.m. in the morning just to pick up the latest iPhone. Even if it has bugs, they're actually happy to identify the bugs and turn back to you and say, hey, there's a bug here. They feel proud about that. They want to be a part of something. Those are the early adopters. But early adopters are also different from the later audience who are the actual users. And you have to distinguish between them very, very carefully. But the early adopters, needless to say, provide valuable information. And early adopters may not necessarily be penetration testers. Then, if you're fixated extensively on pitching to investors, when your scope is not yet very clear, what that means is you're going to end up with shifting scope, or as the project managers call it, scope creep, and the result will be you're going to end up with shifting deadlines. If there's one thing investors are not a big fan of, is shifting deadlines. They understand it, they just don't really like it. The end result is you end up losing the trust of investors, and that causes quite a headache or a hiccup in your operations. Granted, these are the various factors that led to what I would call our rolling train wreck. And my thought is, or rather my question to you is, which single factor do you think contributed the most to the derailment of this professional networking system? This is a poll I want us to throw out on the screen, and I just want to get your thoughts. There is no correct answer here. I just want to look at the model response, get a feel for what you guys think. And Nicola, Rob, do you have the poll ready?
I do. I think it might bring them up together again, but...
Okay, let's... All right, once again, we have the two of them. So here's what I'm going to ask you guys to do. Give me the answers to the first one. Let's see the second one. Okay, the second one. I'm also going to ask you to read through the second one, even though I haven't yet touched on it. But let me explain a bit about the second one. The marketing strategies, which I'm going to take you through eventually, are writing articles, promoting content, going controversial, getting sued. I'll explain that one. And then free consultation. So give me your thoughts on both questions. I'm going to give you as much as a minute. And then we will move on to the next. All right, take your time, read through them, give me your thoughts. All right, 10 seconds to go. I know my version of a minute is very different from the conventional, but 10 seconds to go, so 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's call it in. Let's see what the results are. Great, which single factor contributed the most to the project's failure? Focus on technology, that seems to be the model, yes, 29%. Focus on legalities at the expense of trust, focus on drafting of rules. All right, great, I like that. And then the next one, writing articles. I like that. No one has selected writing articles, but many of you are inclined to promoting content on Facebook, social media that is. No one has gone for going controversial. That means my message about dealing with fear yesterday might not have struck a note, but don't you worry, I'll explain that one. And then free consultations. Great. Okay, I notice we are pretty much distributed on the first one, of course, the model being focused on technology, but let's move on to the next item. So let's talk about one of the projects that, in my mind, qualifies as a success. This is the project around which my company has actually been built. Just to give you a quick background, it's a reporting system. My company is a software development company. We built a reporting system based on an understanding of the market. We asked ourselves, is there demand? And today we actually have a running platform that is currently licensed to a couple of banks within Uganda. One of the challenges we have, and that's why I put it in red, is scalability. But it still ranks as a success story because many people have told us the company has been alive for longer than the average company stays alive. We've been able to pay staff on time, we've been able to meet our obligations, and it's what I would call the kind of, it's not a poster child for a success story, not the runaway successes of the likes of Uber or probably Facebook, but it's definitely on its way there. I thought I would share a couple of things that I learned along the way and that I picked up along the way. And in the process, my expectation is that you will see how we marry all the items that I talked about on day one in this. So one of the first things that I did, at the time I was working with a commercial bank, and then later on I took up a job with the department of, one of the departments of the regulator. That way I had first-hand information on what was going on in the financial sector. I established that there definitely was a need because the regulator had introduced a new requirement. And that requirement, being the regulator, all commercial banks have to adopt or have to abide by that requirement. So my perspective was built around an understanding of the demand. But it wasn't just understanding the demand. I also went ahead to build relationships, what the IBM course, the IBM Design Thinking course calls personas. Those of you who've gone through it, you probably come across this bit. But I built relationships, and these relationships were the basis of trust. Now, what you have to understand is that the relationships I built were such that I would occasionally have meetings with commercial banks. And in the process, I'll talk to them about the challenges they were meeting. These meetings I had with them were official meetings. But in the process, I had the chance to understand their pain points. And of my own accord, I would sometimes pay them a visit, not in my capacity as a member of the regulator, but in my personal capacity. I'll just pass by and say, I'll probably stop by the IT department and say, hey guys, I notice you've been struggling with this, that. Just let's talk about it. Let's have an open conversation. And I'll do this, say, on a Saturday afternoon. With one of the banks that I did that, I later on got a contract with them. And one of the IT staff pointed that out to me. He said, one of the reasons we actually were in favor of giving your company the contract is because you, Sam, would come by once in a while and try and help us. That showed us that you cared more about our well-being. And there's a saying that people don't care how much you know. They only, until they know how much you care. So let me try and say that. I want it to sound as cool as it actually was in my head. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the moment you make that clear to people, the moment you build these relationships with your audience, it becomes one of the fundamental factors that will propel your marketing. Now, I noticed many of you did not tick the bit about writing articles, but let me bring in the issue of writing articles right here. You can't go and meet every one of your clients. You can't take them for lunch. You can't visit every one of them, but you can write an article on social media, promote it, and when people read it, the equivalent of you meeting your customer or your audience becomes the article bonding with them. Basically, when you write a well-phrased article, people read that and they begin to appreciate that this innovator understands our challenges. They're not simply trying to sell us a product. They're actually trying to help us. And the moment you do that, many people will rally to your product. This is just one of the tricks. And that's why I was surprised that nobody ticked writing articles. But not to blame anyone, you didn't have the heads up on that. The second bit that we worked extensively on was we built the minimum viable product. Notice that this came after we had established the need and built the relationships. Then we hashed out a minimum viable product. This is where we did something rather risky. When we had one version of the MVP almost ready, I remember I walked up to one of the commercial banks because by this time I knew many of the staff, and I had it running on a laptop. And I handed them the laptop and I said, guys, test this for me. Spend a week with this laptop. And then after that, I'll come back and pick up the laptop and let's talk about how the implementation could actually solve your problem. And they said, oh, grateful. And they spent a week. By the time I came to pick up the laptop, they had given me a lot of valuable feedback. They said, this part would actually solve the problem, but it's not very accurate. And this way I was getting direct feedback from them. That helped me improve or progress with the minimum viable product. Notice that I'm not even worried about somebody else stealing my idea. Yes, I was worried about it, but I say, honestly, I need to get feedback. Feedback and trust comes first before we get into the whole legality issues. By the time we were done with the MVP and had built all these relationships, I then, of course, drafted proposals and distributed them to the different commercial banks. Some of them responded, most of them didn't. That's just the way the life is. And we finally had the product out there. Now, there's always that fear that precedes delivery of your product to the market. I give you my word, that fear still hits me today when I'm just about to roll out a new product, but I tell myself, I remember what Antonio Garcia Martinez said in the book Chaos Monkeys. Very few businesses have died from launching a product, but many have died from not launching a product. If I hadn't launched this product, I wouldn't have a company today. That's just obvious. Then, once the product was running, we had built the product. Now, many of you are probably putting together innovations based on an assumption about what's happening in the real world. If you get feedback from many people in the real world, you'll be able to refine your assumptions. The Lean Startup talks about that as being validated learning. In this case, once we had deployed the platform, we had a chance to improve the MVP, make modifications. And many times this is where the data science aspect comes in. So to give you an insight of how the application actually works, you've got a banking system in most banks, and the data from the banking system typically is imported by our third-party platform. The assumption we made is that the banking systems have their data structured or very organized, which they do for the most part. But surprise, surprise, there are certain surprising elements of unstructured data within the banking systems. And this is where you have to begin putting together algorithms. Here is an implementation of a very basic algorithm. Banking systems, surprisingly, or at least those that we have encountered, don't seem to care whether you're an individual or a business. They only seem to care about what type of account you're opening, what type of loan you're taking. Meaning, Highland Mineral Water Limited, which obviously is a non-individual entity, and Alan Wasake do not register as two different entities to the banking system. It only questions what type of account are you opening. Unfortunately, the platform we were deploying, which had to generate reports, had to classify all these entities as either non-individuals or individual entities. What algorithm did we come up with? Whenever data was moving from the banking system to our third-party platform, we had to do basic analysis, look at certain keywords within the names of these entities and say, if the word limited, international, or school appears, that's definitely a non-individual entity. I mean, I don't know of anybody called limited as far as I'm concerned. So we fundamentally came up with that sort of algorithm. If something else doesn't meet any of these criteria, it's definitely an individual entity. That's the way we worked it out. So this was basically the criteria. And to our excitement, this actually worked substantially well. It's about 98% accurate. Once in a while, we get a very random name that sneaks through and is qualified the wrong way. And that always causes a bit of a nightmare. But then that just gives us a chance to go back to this step and make improvements to the MVP. That's the whole concept around strategy. You think you know it all until you deploy your product, and then the market tells you, bro, guess what? You don't know it all. Finally, we worked on the copyright. Now, some people might ask, you're doing the copyright at the end? Yes, we've been in operation for close to 8 years without a copyright. The lawyers told us, you implicitly have a copyright. Whenever you design something, you own the copyright indirectly. The lawyers use some fancy word, but I think it's implicit. Whatever that is, the point is, copyright never came up as one of those critical things, even though it's important. And in litigious societies like the US, it's definitely an issue. But you can actually deploy a product, get some traction, and then later on focus on the copyright. Why are we doing the copyright right now? Just because one of our clients asked us for it. They simply explained to us that they'd actually gotten sued by somebody else who held the copyright for another product they are licensing. And now they require all third-party providers to indicate ownership or to prove ownership of the products they're licensing to the bank. And hence the result is we have to also obtain a copyright. I'm just mentioning this so that we appreciate the need for some of the legalities around innovations. Do not obsess over them at the very beginning. Many times I listen to innovators telling me, I'm concerned that somebody might steal my idea, and I usually want to turn back to them and tell them, that should be the last of your concerns. Now, you might ask, why do I say that? It's because I've been listening to the other authors who said, if anything, get your product, go out there and try and get somebody to steal it. People are so busy doing so many other things, they don't have time to steal your product. Now, you might want to contest that. The whole point is you can take it at face value, but it goes to say that sometimes we obsess over the wrong things, and the point is we need to focus our attention on what is more productive. Having said all of that, I've attempted to build a scenario or different scenarios whereby we have the different aspects, so the different items I talked about at the very beginning, namely the perspective, the strategy, the understanding of the audience, all coming together. And one thing you probably notice is none of them necessarily takes precedence. They all seem to have a part that they play. I need to talk to my audience, but keep it simple as I articulate myself to the audience. I also need to use the right tools to be able to talk to the audience. So there's nothing like one of them takes precedence, but all of them have a role that they play. This takes us to the next point, going to market. How do you get your product out to the market? Typically, the incubator, if you qualify to get into the incubator, they will guide you on a number of aspects, and they might even provide you with some resources, some kind of cash or maybe some grants that will help you promote your product. But if you don't qualify for that, there are still ways to present your product to the market. Many people think if I have a check of, say, $10,000 or $50,000, I'll be able to take over the world. Correction, and I'll show you an example of somebody who had a check of that, close to that amount, but failed miserably. Why? They missed out on one fundamental bit, strategy. So how did others do it? And I just thought I'd share a couple of examples that I have come across in the past. While I was reading the book Chaos Monkeys, once again by Antonio Garcia, by the way, I don't have a thing for this book. It's a really beautiful book, and if you have time, find it, read it. It's written by an innovator who went through, he generally went through the entire process, had the highs, the lows, and one of the ways he got his product into the hands of as many people is he wrote an article and posted it onto Y Combinator. In his case, he qualified to get into the accelerator program, which helped him substantially. You may not have that privilege, but the whole point is writing an article says something. And Antonio wrote an article. He's a gifted writer. His book is a beautiful read. Posted it onto this website, and it generated a whole lot of traffic. And the next thing he did, he leveraged on that traffic. Now, one might ask, how do we relate that to a present-day scenario? I am building an app for women in the village. I am building a solar saving solution. I don't know if such a thing exists. Or let's just think about a carpentry shop. Let's say I have a carpentry outlet, and and I'm a member of all these entrepreneur groups on WhatsApp, Facebook. How do I promote it? Let me tell you what I've been seeing a number of people doing. And the picture that I'm using, I picked it up off Google. Many people will say, we make all kinds of furniture. If they're a furniture shop, they'll say, we make all kinds of furniture, visit our showroom at this and this plaza. And that's it. And then I sit back and I'm thinking, you really haven't given me the juicy bits about what you're doing. Yes, you make all kinds of furniture. You expect me to make the mental leap that I have a problem at home and I need to come to you, and consequently, you will solve my problem. What Antonio did and what I have seen the creative people doing is they'll turn around and say, they'll write an article, post it onto Facebook, and they'll phrase it as follows. Why throw away old tires when you can use a little glue, plastic molds, and some foam to bring your yard to life? And now I'm thinking, this is interesting. And then they'll add something like, so here's a 20-minute procedure that my 8-year-old son and I follow to make the in-picture set. Now I'm thinking, okay, this I want to actually read. Why? Because look at what the guy has done. Look at what he's managed to pull off. This is a furniture outlet. This is a carpentry shop. The moment I read this article and I connect with it, I begin to ask myself, do you guys do other furniture? Or what are your thoughts on how I can style up my kitchen? What are your thoughts on how I can improve my office? And they tell me, your office, send us a few pictures, let's have a look at it. What they're actually doing is they are building value and a relationship with me in the process. And next thing I know, when I'm thinking about fixing my chairs or buying new furniture, who am I going to think of? These guys. It's that simple. No, it's not really simple, but the whole point is you'll have to write lots of articles. This is one powerful tactic, because when you write an article, post it on different forums. You could post it on LinkedIn, you could post it on Facebook, you could post it in lots of places. And the magic with Facebook, of course, is today, unfortunately, they are kind of suppressing organic traffic. You'd have to do a promotion. You'd have to boost the article. Use a little money. It's amazing that for about $10, you can boost an article on Facebook significantly. Now, obviously, you need some kind of capital to begin with to be able to pay that $10. But all I'm just trying to share with you is the tactics that can be adopted to ultimately get your product out there. The second person I want to talk about is a genius I came across. He's actually a South African gentleman, I think lives in Cape Town. He's called Neil Malan. But he figured out how to spend peanuts on Facebook. And when I say peanuts, I really mean peanuts for maximum results. His strategy revolves around not going after likes, not going after clicks, but going after what we call conversions. And when I chanced upon him on Facebook, I attended one of his courses, paid the money, went in for one of his courses, and I found the information he provided was very valuable. All I'm saying is Facebook could actually help you propel your innovation to the next level, even with a limited budget. You may not reach as many people, but you can have maximum results. It's something you want to look into. If you want to dig up more on this, go to Google and look at Facebook advertising, keyword conversion. Forget about clicks, forget about likes, focus on conversions. This was a little controversial in my opinion, but pretty interesting. It fascinated me sufficiently. A young entrepreneur in the US built an app. It was actually a website. And this website allowed people to find prices for air tickets at the time when the prices for the tickets were at their lowest. So essentially it was using some kind of machine learning, artificial intelligence to identify off-peak prices, which are generally low. You then place an order, the system purchases the ticket, holds it for you, and then hands it over to you. When the airlines realized what this website was doing, obviously they got very uncomfortable. I think it was United Airlines or American. Bottom line, they decided to sue him. And the unexpected result was that the lawsuit generated a substantial amount of publicity, which actually made his app popular, making him generate more revenue through his app, so that he had a lot more revenue than he needed to run through the lawsuit. End result, they dropped the case, so they lost the case. Bottom line, it was a very interesting way for the product to get out there. But what your takeaway would be from all this is don't be afraid to go out there. Don't be afraid to try. Deploy your product. Get it out there. Even if you get a lot of pushback from your product, of course, as long as your product is operating legally, which is one of the things this young man had to make sure he was doing, as long as your product is operating legally, you'll find that sometimes what is intended for evil turns out to work in your advantage because you end up with the publicity. And in my case, I would say I've borrowed this to a great degree. Many times I'll come up with a name for a product that will trigger the attention, or that will get the attention of even the regulators. And they'll think to themselves, what is going on here? And if they come after that product, even though the product is operating legally, if they come after it, I know for a fact that the law is on my side. And that would actually generate greater momentum for me, borrowing from such a story. The whole point is you have to be of a certain mindset, and sometimes this mindset is one step away from suicidal. Here's another tactic, and unfortunately it is exploited extensively by Ponzi or pyramid schemes in Uganda. Now, you've probably heard about a Ponzi or a pyramid scheme. These are generally scam arrangements. I advise you to stay away from them, but they all rely on what we call word of mouth. They promise higher than average returns. They make a delivery, or they deliver to the first victim. I call this victim one. After that, victim one is very excited about the returns, goes and tells victim two. Victim two, in turn, tells victim three, and now you have a chain reaction triggered. The end result is you have what they call word of mouth. One person tells another about the product. In Uganda, that tends to happen a lot with internet service providers. You come up with a wonderful package, unlimited internet, or something of that sort. And when you've provided an exceptional service to one person, they'll tell the next person, who will tell the next, and generally the whole story starts to pass on. And many of the ISPs I'm currently using, even in the office, I found out about them through word of mouth. There was no mass publicity about them, but word of mouth. You have to have a rock solid product to be able to achieve that. But you also have to have an effective value proposition within your innovation. If it's a healthcare system, it definitely has to have something that makes people excited about it and want to tell the world about it. And that's what we call word of mouth. The example I use is probably not the best, but you get the idea. This I came across while reading a book by a gentleman called Russell Brunson, .com Secrets, the Underground Playbook. And in it, he talks about a dentist in the US who offered a free consultation. And Russell saw the word free consultation and said, hell, yeah, I'm going for this. Runs in, and while the dentist is working on him, obviously giving the free consultation, he notices a couple of things and tells him, hey, did you wear braces when you were a kid? And Russell says, yeah, how can you tell? And they says, well, your two left teeth are starting to shift again, which is common in people who wore braces. That means you probably need braces. And Russell says, okay, is there anything you can do about that? And says, yeah, we have braces. They cost approximately $2,500. And Russell's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I can sign up for that. The nurse is working on him. He says, oh, by the way, this and this and that. And it's because of the free consultation that the dentist is getting information from you by working on your teeth. He's actually seeing a bigger issue. He's seeing actually the value assigned around working on your teeth. And that way he markets a new product to you, what you'd call an upsell. And in the process, you turn around and you know, because you've received value from this dentist, you want to receive more value. A law firm has actually pulled that off on me pretty effectively. They offered me a free consultation and I fell for it. And in the end, I'm currently using them. So point is, law firms, dentists, innovators, whatever you're working on, free consultation could actually be a very good way to get your word out to as many people as possible. Having said this, let me throw, okay. Unfortunately, we've already answered this question. So now you see where this next question came from. I would have loved to throw this question out to you and say, which do you think would have been the most effective marketing strategy for you to employ? And of course, there's no correct answer here. There's the writing of articles, promoting content, there's going controversial. I know many people are a bit cautious about going controversial, and the free consultations. There's also one other that I had added, which I added afterwards. That's pretty much my fault, which was not getting sued, but yes, word of mouth. That would have been the next one. That said, let's crown it all by talking about how others failed. I have one example of a gentleman who believed that provided he had a windfall of cash, he would expand his business phenomenally. I don't remember where I came across this story. It was either Forbes or one of the websites. But the point is, this businessman inherited $20,000. And what he decided to do, well, to his credit, he sunk it into his business. He decided to do a 1 month worth of full page color promotions in a popular magazine. That's probably like going to Cosmopolitan and paying for 1 month worth of full page, full color adverts on one page. What it did was it got him a lot of traffic for the month, but few leads. The end result was he ended up suing the magazine for misrepresentation. Now, when I read about this, I reflected upon people like Neil Malan, who have figured out the magic around working with Facebook. Others have figured out the magic around working with Google. Others have figured it out on LinkedIn. And it's interesting that $20,000 on Facebook could get you significant mileage. The same on Google, the same on LinkedIn. But you have to have an effective strategy by which you're going to make this money leverage your concept. Otherwise, if you go out and do what the same businessman did, you're going to feel extremely disappointed. So if you won the competition and you got a cash prize, my one question to you would be, how would you use it? And even if you didn't win the competition, and you only had so much money. Mind you, for my company, when I was building it, my resources came from my salary. So many times I had to use the limited resources to get the word out there, go around, drive around, do presentations, talk to different people, build relationships, but there was a return at the end of the day. And in this case, what you want to avoid doing is wasting your hard-earned capital down the wrong channel. So when you think about going to market, make sure that you have the right strategy, make sure you leverage it correctly, and understand how the different marketing aspects or the different marketing angles play out. Writing articles, promoting content, sometimes free consultations, each of them has a role to play. But when I read through your innovations, the first thing I notice is you all have an opportunity to use either one of these. Now, you might turn around and say, I'm not good at writing articles. One of your teammates might actually be good. But here is the point. When you read the book, Copywriting Secrets, that was by Jim Edwards, and I talked about it in the first webinar, day one. One of the things he says is anyone can become good at writing articles, or what people call writing copy. Anyone can become good at it. If you can learn to ride a bike, if you can learn to drive a car, you can definitely learn to write copy. That is one thing that everybody can do. You just have to spare some time for it. Alternatively, you could task one of your team members to do that. Reason being, you need to get your word out there and get people to begin bonding with you. The more people hear from you, the more people read your articles, the more people begin to believe in what you're saying. A classic example of a gentleman who writes exceptional articles in Uganda. We have a gentleman called Amos Wekesa, and he is what you call a tourism guru. He is so passionate about tourism. On just about any forum, any panel where they're talking about tourism, he's usually invited. The more Amos makes such appearances, the more we think of him as the face of tourism in Uganda. The more he writes articles about tourism, the more we begin to think of him as the face of the subject. So when Amos turns around and says, Great Lakes Safaris is my tourism company, if ever I'm thinking of taking a tour, I'm not going to think about many other companies. I'm simply going to think about Great Lakes Safaris. Why? Amos is always out there. He's always writing something about the pleasure of touring and looking at gorillas, or probably finding out about climbing lions and so many other things. He always styles them up in a very creative way. If you want to become a better writer, I would also encourage you to read a lot. Or go to sites like Quora, where you have people who actually write exceptionally well. But pick up a book, take some time, read it, and you'll find that you begin improving your skills. And this should help you get to a point where you become an exceptional writer, and not just an exceptional writer, but you begin to explore different ways to get your product out there, get people to find out about your message, or get people to find out about your innovation. And whether you win the competition, whether you get into the incubation or not, you should have a chance to get your product into the hands of as many people. That wraps it up for today. Thank you very much. I think no questions in the chat, but I think I can now invite a couple of questions in the Q&A, or I can hand it over to Nicola to take us to the next level. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Sam, for the presentation. No questions have come through so far. So if anybody does have a question that they'd like to ask, please do so now. Otherwise, we will call it a day.
That would be interesting. If there are no questions, that means either I was very clear or nobody understood a single thing I said. All right.
There is a question. Can you please touch on going controversial?
All right. Mohammed, you asked about going controversial. Let me bring up the slide where this young gentleman, what I call going controversial. When I say going controversial, I don't mean going out and doing something illegal. Don't get me wrong. What I mean is not being afraid to test the limits. Test the limits constructively. In Uganda, we have, let me give you maybe a few examples that I have seen in Uganda. Going controversial is associated with drawing the attention of regulators, even when what you're doing is actually legal. In Uganda, we had a situation where it was an entertainment company, it's called Bein. They have a sports decoder, and their prices were so much lower. But it so happens that they are only licensed to offer their services to, I think, Middle East and North Africa. But because of Uganda's geographical position, we can actually get their signal, though we need a bigger dish to be able to get their signal. What happened is the local provider, that is MultiChoice, I think EdNet, reported them to the regulator, Uganda Communications Commission. Now, the regulator posted an article in the newspapers saying Bein's operations are not legal in Uganda. Bein also responded and said, we are not operating in Uganda. It's just a couple of Ugandans who buy our equipment and bring them to Uganda, but we don't legally sell to Ugandans, and we don't even sell to Ugandans. That was their position. That created a bit of controversy because Bein was very correct about their position. MultiChoice was also correct. But unknowingly or unwittingly, the public got to find out more about the Bein sports decoder. And lots of people began now buying the Bein sports decoder. Unknowingly, they had ended up marketing themselves, or the regulator had accidentally marketed them while trying to suppress them. So that's what I mean by going controversial, not being afraid to test the waters. In this case, this young gentleman, this entrepreneur in the US, was simply testing an app, found that, hey, it can actually help me buy air tickets at a lower price because I am exploiting a loophole that these guys have left out there. I could inform them about the loophole, probably he did. But what do they turn around and do? They turn around and sue him. And then the public finds out about it and says, hello, if they're suing him, he's doing something right. And besides, it's not illegal. And surprise, surprise, he won the court case. Notice that all of that has a controversial aspect to it. So that's what I mean by going controversial. It doesn't mean do something illegal. It means don't be afraid to look at things differently and try something that nobody has ever tried. That's actually what I mean. Now, sometimes there's a fine line there, but I know we're all mature enough to figure out what I'm trying to get across. I hope that helps, Mohammed.
Thanks,
Right.
Sam.
Sure.
So let's take the next question. What is your take on video presentations for going to market?
Video presentations at the moment have some of the best engagement rates, not just video presentations, but live presentations. So Facebook offers what they call Facebook Live, but video presentations also are very effective. I've come to learn that YouTube is a pretty efficient channel to market. Why? Because increasingly people are getting very good internet connections, the unlimited internet connections, which allow them to go to YouTube, look at lots of videos and not worry about running out of data or data bundles. So video is becoming a promising thing. Notice that even my example in day one, when I was talking about obtaining, adapting who you listen to or what you're listening to, I referenced YouTube, which is fundamentally a video sharing site. And it's got such a beautiful algorithm that helps you identify alternative authors. Video presentations on YouTube are becoming the norm. Whenever I'm looking for instructions on how to do something, I go to YouTube. So I would say if you want to go to market, leverage that. It's just that some people are afraid to get behind a camera and try and do a proper video presentation. Don't be afraid. I would actually tell you, if you're afraid, keep trying different things. Either just do your voice only for the first time, then later on do a few snapshots. Notice that none of you has actually seen me talking. And even then I still get intimidated about getting behind the camera, but I've learned that if I do a 1-minute video clip, that gets better engagement than a 30-minute video clip. I've ever done a tutorial for approximately 25 minutes and only 5 people listened to it, even though about 1,000 people looked at it. Whereas when I do a very short video clip of about 30 seconds, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, it gets better engagement. So video is definitely something you want to explore. Okay, I think we can go to the next one.
Okay, question from Cuthbert. Can you touch base on your slide when you were talking about being a writer? You didn't catch the question that you put forward on your slide.
Okay, being a writer is, I believe this is the one where I referenced Antonio Garcia, who wrote an article and he posted it to this particular URL. Now, what you have to understand is that this URL targets a certain audience. This is mostly the Silicon Valley audience, and that is where he was operating. Depending on the country in which you are, and I hope I'm answering your question correctly, by the way, being a writer, he focused on a certain audience, and depending on your country, you might also have to look at places where you can post articles and address them to a specific audience. Facebook allows you to select your audience very effectively. You can target specific elements of your audience just so that your article is presented to them. You could also do a few videos on YouTube, which would have the same impact. The whole point is once you do an article or a video, you analyze who's reading the article, who's watching the video, and then you begin what they call retargeting. Now that is something that you can go to Google and search up on, what they call retargeting either in Google or Facebook. The whole point is that once people have read your article, you could also give them a call to action. So one, you could retarget them with more information. For instance, you've probably written just one article about carpentry. Today you've written about used car tires. Tomorrow you could talk about different types of wood and their relevance in security. You talk about cypress wood or mahogany. Somebody's going to think, cypress for doors? I thought it's usually mahogany that's used for doors. And suddenly they begin to associate you as an authority because you've shared your opinion. Now, I'm talking about in the carpentry context. On the other hand, if you have already done, if you're now looking at retargeting, you could then go back and say, anybody who read this article, I now want to send them a second article. That's the whole idea behind retargeting. Or I want to give them a reminder about what else they could do. Typically, what many authors on the internet advise you to do is that if you write an article, at the end of the article, have a call to action. Tell people, great, you like this tactic? Here is a cheat sheet you can download. And when you go to download the cheat sheet, they ask you for your email address before they can give you the cheat sheet on how to get this 20-minute procedure. Because they've spoken about it, they say, I'm going to give you the first 4 steps, but the cheat sheet has 12 steps. So when a person says, oh, I want the cheat sheet, I want to see how, I want to be able to do this myself. When you give them, when they give you their email address because they've clicked the link to download the cheat sheet, now you add them to what they call an email list, and then you can start telling them about your products. You can tell them, okay, now that I have you on my email list, I can send you an email and say, by the way, we also do this, we also build this. This is a product, this is a project we recently completed for such and such a hotel. We changed the entire interior and things of that nature. That's the whole power of writing. Writing is really tied into creativity. Let your creative juices flow. And as people begin to develop a relationship with you, they'll generally enjoy listening to whatever you have to say. That's a very interesting marketing trick, which I'll talk about tomorrow. Okay, I hope that answers the question for Cuthbert.
Thanks, Sam. So there's just a question on where the participants can get this recording. It will be uploaded to the Static Innovation website, probably tomorrow or by Friday morning. The next question is, can I eliminate competition by partnership with my competitor if it's indirect?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I'd love to understand the detail on this one, because it says, can I eliminate competition by a partnership? So what you're saying is partnering with my competitor. The only example that comes to mind is in the breweries section. At least in Uganda, I heard about this. And we have a local brewer. I think it's East African Breweries or Uganda Breweries, something like that. And instead of letting Heineken come into the country and set up their own brewery, they offered to partner with Heineken, who's actually a direct competitor. And they now brew Heineken on behalf of, I think, Heineken International, something like that. I know there's some kind of partnership of that sort, which I found very, very odd, but it works. So yes, to answer your question, I could say you could eliminate competition, or you could avoid the adverse effects of competition. Now, about an indirect partnership, typically your indirect competitor is somebody who's selling to the same audience but a different product. So they really don't pose a threat. Think of it this way. Your target audience is people who need a certain drug. These are people within a certain age bracket, maybe 50 to 80. And that's your target audience. So you're selling them health supplements. Another person is selling them drugs, what you'd call medical pharmaceutical drugs. That person is an indirect competitor of yours. They are not really coming after them for taking them away from you, but they are focusing on the same target segment. So I've sort of answered two different questions, but that's because I couldn't quite distinguish which one you wanted. But my hope is that somewhere in the middle, you've gotten the answer. I hope that helps.
Okay, so our next question is, there is a situation of doing a soft launch or user testing, then a competitor does a quick copycat. What would you do?
Well, the only way I can answer that question is by revealing that I wasn't the first in the market. Somebody else built a product before I did. Now, I didn't copy his product. What I did is I built my version of a product, but I was going after his same customers. And later on, some of his clients left him, they moved over to me. So to answer your question, if you do a soft launch and then somebody does what you call somebody does what you'd call a quick copy, and then they try and get the fast mover advantage. I'll give you a few examples in the past just to allay your fears that even if somebody does a quick copycat, deploys, understand one thing. It's not about being the first in the market. It's about how many clients you ultimately manage to get. Now, many of the authors I've listened to actually helped me make peace with this realization. They said the world has got, I think, approximately 9 billion people now, and roughly 5 billion of them are on the internet. Excuse me. That means the pie is significantly big, and there is a piece for just about everyone. However, in some markets, it becomes very brutal. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid getting into cutthroat competition. I would only point out that don't be afraid of cutthroat competition. The moment somebody copies your idea, what they've actually done is they've validated the concept. They've actually told you that there's actually demand for this idea, or there's a demand for this product. That's number one. Number two, what the person's also telling you is that they are trying to copy things from the surface. If they are doing a direct copy-paste, I wouldn't lose sleep over that because I'll be focusing on building the relationship with my clients in the back end. When you build a relationship with your clients through consistent communication, sharing with them ideas, what we call building personas. If you go back and look at the IBM course and look at building personas, you ultimately create for them an identity that they bond with. Another thing to keep in mind is that as you build an identity that they bond with, ordinarily we as human beings love to see competition. If we know that there's only one product out there, we kind of feel like we are being lied to, or we're being denied the option of choice. Uber exists, but we know there's also Lyft. And so we always like to say, well, if there's Uber and Uber isn't giving me what I want, I try Lyft. Eventually, people feel content to have two items on their phone, or two ride-hailing apps on their phone. On the other hand, people also, when we go to supermarkets, it's surprising to realize that our decisions ultimately boil down to the variety we find on the shelves. You don't just want to find Coca-Cola on the shelf alone. You also like to see, okay, there's Pepsi. Then you quickly compare the prices and you pick one. Eventually you find that, I like Fanta more than Mirinda. Now, to the person who's building Mirinda or producing Mirinda, that's not something they want to hear. But it just tells them that they need to find a different engagement channel to get your attention. So if somebody comes up with competition, personally, I look at competition as something that keeps me on my toes and helps me improve my product. And my clients always like to see me making effort to improve my product, make them happy. And in the process, I begin keeping more of them. That would be my angle to the concern. I know what you're actually questioning here might be an aspect of, should I be afraid? How should I deal with this? And I would say, if you get cold feet, yes, that happens to all of us, but snap out of it. Reason being, that's just the way the world is. There's typically competition for almost everything that comes out, especially if it's a worthy product. But your job is to keep as many of the clients with you. And you do that by building a relationship with them, namely, write articles that will appeal to them. Your competitor may not be doing that. Your competitor might only be looking at the surface, having a similar app, while in your case, what you're doing is you're turning to your clients and telling them, this is how I can help you make your life better. And when your clients hear that, they'll start talking to others, and life goes on that way. I hope I helped with that one.
Thanks very much, Sam. We've come to the end of our session. We have no more questions in our Q&A box. So I think as we come to the end, I'd like to thank you again for making time to set up this series of webinars this week and presenting this one this afternoon.
Sure.
And I think if everybody can attend tomorrow's webinar, it would be very useful to get the live version of the third presentation. Otherwise, as I said previously, everything will be put onto the SADC Innovation website as soon as we can.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Nicola.
Thanks, Sam.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for attending and participating. Have a good evening.
You too. Have a good one, everybody.